Hello, and welcome to the Green Team of the Legendarium, the weird little spin-off where patrons of the Legendarium get together to talk about the books and topic the main crew haven't gotten around to yet. I'm Seeker, and today I have with me, and I'm blanking on your name,
I'm Jingles.
and we are currently reading Book 1 of the Paksenarrion trilogy, The Sheepfarmer's Daughter. So we have actually not discussed this among us. So before we go any further, Jingles, why did you agree to this book? What made you say, "Hey, I want to do this one"?
Well, Elizabeth Moon was a name that I had seen many times, specifically this book, and I had never read anything published by Baen, which I know sounds like a really weird reason to want to read something, but Baen Publishing, for whatever reason, that logo always kind of pushed me away from the books for some reason. I was very much judging a book by its cover. I have no actual rational reason for it.
Okay, so like maybe the artwork or something.
Yeah, the artwork just wasn't doing it for me. So I really have no rational reason for why I chose not to do that up until this point. But I read the synopsis of this one. I really liked the idea of focusing on a paladin specifically, because that's just not something I'm very familiar with
Mm,
outside of, like D&D or Warcraft or something.
right.
So yeah, it just sounded interesting from those few
Cool.
little tidbits I had.
Yeah, this is something I found Elizabeth Moon years ago when I was just going through classic sci-fi and fantasy authors, and I've read this trilogy, and and I really hope that it is hers. I haven't double checked, but it's the Serrano Legacy.
Okay.
So there's another series called the Serrano Legacy. I think it's 6 or 7 books, and it's about a captain who has these family connected military. It's kind of half military sci-fi, kind of half social family drama.
Okay.
I love reading fiction written by women during the 60s and 70s. It's an odd era for how women view the world. In people writing now, there's almost a script of how women are supposed to be depicted and the struggles they have to go through. But in the 60s and 70s, every author was still exploring and feeling that and trying to see, okay, do we include more of this? Do we include more of that? How strong should the character be? How aggressive can we make them? Do we want them aggressive? And it's just a real fascinating time with a massive amount of diversity in the exploration of how women would be in a world of semi-gender equality, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's what I think. Without getting too deep into spoilers, but I agree with you. There is like an interesting conversation to be had here about a woman's role in a mercenary or military faction, right? I don't know. It's a statement. A statement needed to be made by Elizabeth Moon. I feel like, especially as a person who served in the military herself.
Didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's right on the back of the book. That's the only reason I know.
I don't have the back of the book, and I didn't look
Yeah.
her up.
So I think she had a lot of things to say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think
definitely.
she portrays them pretty strongly. I think there's no denying what her perspective is in this book, which is kind of a weird thing to say because I'm not always like, oh, you have to believe that whatever the author is saying in the book is necessarily something they also believe in real life. But I, given how positively she makes Pax out to be, I don't see how she couldn't feel that way.
Yeah,
um, so yeah.
that is fascinating. All right, so here we have some questions. Is this the first book by Elizabeth Moon either of us have read? Well, we know it was your first, and if
Yep.
memory serves, it was mine as well. It's been a long time. I just reread it for probably the first time in maybe 7 or 8 years, and saw some things I hadn't seen before. Enjoyed it for different reasons, I think.
All right.
Main themes of the novel. I think we covered that with our discussion of how Moon was trying to say stuff about women in the military.
Yep. And I think there's also a lot of play on nobility and honor in there.
Oh, absolutely,
And what
yes.
it means to be, and what it means to truly be those things.
And also the idea of what it means to be a soldier versus the reality of being a soldier.
Yes, very much.
As book one in a series, how good of an introduction do you think this was?
It left a strong impression for me. I'm definitely interested in continuing the series. I don't know if I'll go past the third book
To my
because
knowledge,
that's
there
an
are only
actual.
three, or at least three is all I've ever
So
read.
that's that's the contained trilogy. But then I think when I was looking, there's also a like prequel series that's about Gerd in some fashion. At least
Oh,
the Gerd's name pops up. And then there's also the legacy of Pax, I think, was another one.
I
I
don't
could be
think I've read
incorrect on
any of
that,
those.
but yeah, but at least the trilogy I'm looking to finish, follow through on.
I love the way it includes lots of hooks for the rest of the trilogy, shall we say, while remaining spoiler free.
Yeah, that's something I'm actually really excited to get into with the world building because I actually think this is some of the best subtle world building I've seen in a while.
Okay.
Um, uh, that very much deviates from like the hard magic explanation.
I was going to say, you mean Sanderson's maps?
Hey,
Which are beautiful to look
Sanderson,
at, but
Weeks, any of those guys.
he does draw a picture very, very detailed. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the world building here is much more akin to something like Erickson.
For a person who likes this book, what other authors might they like?
Okay, so off the top of my head, this is very much military fantasy. So I haven't necessarily read this, but I believe The Black Company is something that people who read that, they would love this because that has been kind of always been sold to me as like the pinnacle of military fantasy.
It is. I'll disagree with you. I mean, you said you haven't read it. I have.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a lot darker, and it's written by a guy. And both of those make a difference. Pax is full of hope. Well, for me, the entire Black Company can be summed up in a phrase that's continuously repeated throughout. Soldiers die and wonder why. It's about the futility of the soldier's existence.
Okay, yeah, this is far less negative than that. Okay. Then I rescind my.
I really haven't read much military fantasy written by women. There just isn't that much of it, as far as I know. And there is a definite difference in what is, areas of focus and things like that.
Yeah, and just the positivity. Positive feeling of positivity in this book is just very different from.
Yeah, Pax is a very uplifting story.
Yeah. It's just very different from most fantasy I've read. The paladin portion definitely leaves its mark.
Here, Eridandus is asking, which is a related question to what we're talking about right now, where would we rank Pax amongst the pantheon of paladins? Which you've already told me you haven't read very many. Aside from Dragonlance and D&D novels, the only other series I've read that involves paladins is the War God trilogy by David Weber.
Okay.
I would have to say very comparable themes, which I'll touch on once we hit the spoilers, and very similar, uplifting, hopeful style. I think that when you're writing a paladin, I don't see how you can write a depressing life is futile, there's no hope, when you've literally got a god showing up saying, I'm on your side.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to. I mean, you can certainly put them in darker environments, and I'd say Moon does that. But ultimately, especially if they're the hero and they're going to prevail, you got to kind of end on that higher note.
Yes, absolutely.
I think for me, like Dragonlance is actually great. I was kind of stumped by this question because a lot of the things that I can think of as paladins are not called paladins. Like I would say the Knights Radiant in Sanderson are a form of paladin. and they rank up there pretty high for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, they would be.
Um,
I mean, the
yeah,
the the people inhabiting the shards or the consciousnesses
yeah,
rank as a deity, I guess, depending on how you define one.
yeah,
You know, I
right.
mean, it would definitely qualify as a
And
Greek god.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. um, and then there's Sturm Brightblade was another one that came to mind. He's not a paladin though; he's a
Mhm.
knight. He's from
Right.
Dragonlance. For
Yeah,
those who
he's
aren't aware,
the
um,
lawful good character in that. in that-
right?
I remember when I was reading
So,
it so many times, I just
uh,
wanted to headbutt him and go, "You can't always be this predictable."
right. Well, so that's funny because there's a certain predictability to Pax,
Hmm.
but I never felt that way. But really, like, that's the biggest I see Lady Sweden has. What kind of reader is this book for? I really think it is like for someone who wants a happier fantasy story that doesn't talk down to you in any sort of way. This is the book for you.
Yeah.
Um, you have a character that is very much, lawful good, like we said, but they're also not dumb about it. Like, it's not, um,
Yeah, she's very practical.
yeah. And it's not like this is the one way to do things. And, there are so many ways that can go wrong.
To hint at a non-spoilery spoiler, that is half the thing of this book is her judging reality against her ideals and trying to see what has to give, what should be held on to, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be a good leader, a good general? Okay, I don't want to say any more because we're going to hit spoilers, but why don't you go ahead and give us your recap?
Sure. All right. So Paksenarrion has never dreamed of getting married. So when her father decides for her that she will get married to a pig farmer, Pax decides to follow her actual dreams and become an honorable fighter in the military. Red mercenary party here. She takes to being a soldier quickly, faces a brutal assault, travels with her company to participate in skirmishes and sieges, visits healers many times, travels across the country in a daring rescue effort, and then pursues the honey badger's extra magical and dangerous cousin, the honey cat. Throughout these journeys, Pax's perceptions of honor and justice are tested, and her choices on what to do with the honey cat when he is finally captured will determine if she is truly more than a sheep farmer's daughter.
For the beginning, I just enjoy the entire boot camp experience. I thought it was very well. I can't say realistic because I've never been to boot camp, but it sounds realistic.
Yeah, I the only measure we're getting fully into spoilers at this point, right?
Oh yes.
So okay, so the only real thing that I can like connect this to in any way I've never served is the opening of Full Metal Jacket. Like that's the closest thing understanding I have of a boot camp, which is not a necessarily well painted thing. So it was kind of nice to see. There is an interesting balance here of someone being strict and stern with you and expecting something out of you, but not being
Yes.
abusive towards you. And I think the balance is played out very well. And I think a lot of that comes from Moon being a person who has experienced these things and came out of them, I would assume, feeling better for it. Because she really never portrays this particular mercenary group in any bad light,
No.
except for the one time at the very beginning of the book where Pax gets assaulted.
Mhm. But even there, it's not the mercenary group. It's the specific officer
Yeah,
who allowed his prejudgment of the situation to
yeah.
override his better sense. And he failed to investigate. But once it's kind of shoved under his nose, he does the right thing and doesn't try to fight it.
He does the right thing, and many times it's brought up, this is a scenario where you have to follow the leaders, you
Mhm.
have to go up the ranks and do this the correct way, follow the chain of command, until Stammel, who is in the chain of command, decides to actually start looking at the evidence of the situation and chooses to not necessarily go around rank, but manipulate rank so that the result is more just, which I appreciated.
Right. Well, he uses the rules in order to get his desired outcome. He doesn't. He just insists that the rules be followed
Right.
because he knows that Pax is actually under someone else's command, and so by demanding she be heard by this other person, there'll be more time for investigation, and he can actually get a full investigation started without stepping on anybody's feet, too badly. And I do like the way that, she deals with the one person who was involved but was drugged, enchanted. He was somehow involved in the assault, yet remembers absolutely nothing of it. And the way he deals with her, the way the friends deal with her later, and the way he deals with the friends to let them know, no, we're good. And even the way the military, like, we recognize that you were enchanted and you probably weren't in full control of your faculties when this happened. However, a crime was committed and someone has to pay. And I honestly don't know how I feel about that sense of justice, but yet there's a sense of fairness to that way of doing it.
Yeah, I think throughout. So, for those who haven't read the book yet and are listening to spoilers, this event happens probably in the first 100 pages or close to. And it's a very odd timing because nothing else has really happened at this point. I think Pax is maybe trained with a sword once, and then you go to the next chapter and she's in a dungeon, beaten and bloodied and can barely walk. And it's a really uncomfortable tonal switch that very much stuck with me throughout the entire book because I was looking for reason. Like, why do we have to have this? Why does it have to show up?
Up until now, it's not a Chekhov's gun for anything, unless it's a character growth or something.
No, it's not. Well, and so I think that's what it is. I don't think it's necessarily Pax's character growth, because I don't think I think what she learns out of it are the boundaries of the company. And I think that's actually what this serves most for, is for us to understand what kind of justice this company is willing to enact. And it shows us what their level of honor is.
Yeah, we do get a good look into their...
Yeah, because we get most of this is not even from Pax's perspective. It's from all of their perspectives, right? So yeah, I think it just shows us what kind of company she's with, what kind of honor they feel. And I think that actually is very important for us to understand later when the Duke is getting ready to torture Honeycat.
Ooh, interesting.
Or Siviana.
Yeah.
I can't remember what his actual name is. Because it's a deviation, right? He's ready to just enact whatever he feels like enacting. But that's not the correct motive compared to what we saw with Stammel and the captains.
Right, and she holds his own honor up to him.
Correct. Yeah. So I always, like, at the beginning, I thought it was a really weird and abrupt situation to get, but after reading the rest of the book, I was actually quite satisfied that we had those moments. Just kind of an odd thing to say about an assault, but I think hopefully people understand what I mean.
But in considering, I brought up this section, what was another section that really stood out to you? As the battles to me were basically just battles, but there were at least one other scene or one other scenario that I think is pivotal to Pax's growth. Well, two more that are pivotal to Pax.
To Pax's growth. I want to say the interaction with Sobin and Kana when they are when she first holds Gerd's amulet is a thing that stands out to me. And then the very ending is also interesting to me, but I think for different reasons than what you're talking about. So what are the events you had in mind?
Definitely the entire 7-day trek, and especially the interactions with the amulet and with Gerd. And this is what I find fascinating is, I don't know if it's a trope, but I think Plato said something like, those who most deserve power are those who least desire it, or something like that. And you see this in this, and you see this in the other Clear Paladin trilogy that I've read, that basically the god has to beat them over the head with a 2x4 before they'll even realize they're being talked to. And, in this, you clearly see Pax, a god working with or through Pax, and yet Pax doing anything and everything she can to deny it.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, well, no, it was the ointment. Well, no, I just got lucky. I've been working hard, therefore I got a cramp. It has nothing to do with any kind of divine intervention. I'm just me.
Yeah.
And, it plays into the whole Moses, Gideon type thing, if you know your Old Testament, where, God's going, hey, I want you to do this. And they're like, how do I know you're really God?
How do you make this out to be true? Yeah, it's an interesting. This book is always flirting with a lot of tropes, right? I think as someone could make a point that Pax is almost too good. But I think within the I think within the realm of asking the more philosophical questions of what makes a good leader, I think Moon is expressing those through Pax, and I think we're seeing exactly what needs to.
This was also written during the era when main protagonists were supposed to be archetypes.
Right.
We hadn't gotten to the anti-hero and the counter-hero and the hero with the feet of clay and, all of these things that have come since the 90s, basically.
Yeah. It's honestly kind of refreshing having a character that's so straightforward, and not in an uninteresting way.
She's almost aspirational.
She is. I mean, I wish I could hold back as much as you do. I wish I wouldn't react poorly in certain situations that I'm sure I react very poorly in. So, especially like even looking at that 7-day trek, it's just like they were so perfect in the way they handled everything up until the last moment when they thought they were out in the open.
Oh yeah. And that whole scene with the buying food, it's like they had every right to just wreak vengeance, and they didn't.
They understood exactly what the scenario was, and they gave people an opportunity for an out even. I was like, you don't have to do this. We can just keep moving. So yeah, I actually forgot about that, about the thieves trying to murder them. That was an interesting event.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just love the way it's handled so honorably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There really isn't another word for that.
No, there really isn't. That's the kind of the funny thing. Every time I'm trying to think of something to say other than honorable, but she is so honorable. Like that's the whole point. And so to say anything different is kind of weird.
She's almost naive, but yet in a very practical way. It's like, well, no, it's like these are the stories that I grew up hearing talked about people who were good, and these were the reasons that they were good. I want to be good, therefore I want to act in the way the stories depicted these people. You know, and in modern views of history, we look at those and goes, "Oh yeah, that's been whitewashed. Let's see if we can find out what their failings were." Whereas Pack simply takes it as, "No, we like these stories because these people were good. I'm going to emulate what made them good." And it's just, like you said, very refreshing. In a world of the Black Company and the Blade itself. I finished that and I went into a depression for a week.
That's what I think a lot of people would agree with you. I haven't read those yet either, so.
That just gut punched me.
Yeah. Hard. Yeah, I mean, outside of some Warhammer novels, I really don't read that much grimdark. Eventually, I'm going to read The Blade itself, but there is like that hesitancy of I've read a lot of other heavy fantasy, and so it's like sometimes I do just want to go back to get your party and go on an adventure.
I heard a lot of people call the Song of Ice and Fire grimdark and very depressing, and I did not find it so. I found it to be extremely realistic medieval battle. It's a
Yeah.
it's realistic medieval combat set in a fantasy world, and I'm just like, oh yeah, well this is how it was.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when I was reading The Blade itself, I was expecting a fantasy novel with heroes and villains, But I went into the Song of Ice and Fire going, oh yeah, this is just people.
Yeah. And I think even in like Song of Ice and Fire, you can, not everyone, there are some that are worse than others, but you can usually see the motivation of why someone's doing something the way they're doing it, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely,
it does, I
absolutely.
think, maybe angle a little bit on that darker side, but it is far more neutral in my
Well,
opinion.
some of the families are a bit twisted more than
Oh,
others,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. But there's also some
But
really
even
good.
there, within their own twisted logic, they make sense.
Yeah. Especially when
You
they
know,
they're when their politics are such as they are, like sometimes you don't have other choices. And it becomes
right?
really weird. Which is
Yeah.
something, that's interesting about this book is that we do get an explanation that not every mercenary company is like the one Pax is in. Um,
Right.
that you know this is their honor is very much something they've chosen to enforce, and then we get plenty of other companies that want to participate in that as well, and so they kind of become allies. But you also get the idea that
Hmm.
some of them are not motivated by honor, they are just motivated by revenge against Honeycat.
Right.
And then Honeycat is far on that deep end of dark.
Yeah, I would classify him as chaotic evil.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to have someone who
You
properly
know.
opposes the lawful good, right?
Yes, of course. You know.
So
And if you just had lawful good versus lawful evil, that would be boring.
absolutely. Yeah, I feel like for me that's actually a good time to get into like the world building aspect of it. I was wondering, how do
Sure,
you
go ahead.
feel for a fantasy novel? This is very much like Game of Thrones in some ways, in that you don't really see much magic, right? Or even
No, there's almost none.
dwarves and elves exist, we know that, but they kind of keep to
Right.
themselves. They show up in bigger cities. We know that gods are enforcing themselves, or using their powers in some way for the people who worship them. Gerd is an
Hmm.
example, but even then, Gerd is pretty subtle in a weird way, because we have to establish why someone who is not worshipped by Gerd is actually getting Gerd's blessing, which is interesting.
Which they're not even sure about yet. They
Yeah,
suspect it's Gerd's blessing, but they're not positive.
they're not even positive of that. But there are people who use like actual magic.
Hmm.
A lot of the mages,
Yeah, we have wizards and potions and, healing and things like that.
yeah, like I found it interesting that shape shifting is something that only Honeycat's team or company uses, whereas Falon's
True.
doesn't seem to have any of that. The magic that they use is almost exclusively restricted to healing.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm curious what you think. Maybe this is answered in the other two books, but like why that separation?
I it's been a long time, so I'm gonna make basically a guess because I can't remember the answer to this. So it's not a spoiler for the next books because I could be wrong.
All right.
Um, m- my guess is that the Honeycat was some kind of paladin for the dark gods.
Okay.
And so he was gifted certain powers that only a paladin or high priest or whatever of those deities would have. And in good, so far, the only powers we've seen besides healing are basically enchanted weapons
Hmm.
and counters to things like, acid mist or, a ball of darkness. Very, very like low to mid-level D&D classic spells,
Right. I
you
mean,
know.
yeah, because that was kind of an interesting too about plot progression in this book, was that a lot of the skirmishes at the beginning were just people fighting people. And then as you
Yes.
moved further down into the south, when they're getting closer to Honeycat, the battles get way more complex because magic gets involved.
Hmm.
Um,
Speaking of the complexity of the battles, there are two basic ways of writing battles that I've noticed. One is the general's view, and the other is the individual soldier's view.
Mhm.
And with Pax, we generally get the individual soldier. She has no clue what the other company's doing. She's only focused on us, and we only hear about the other people when someone needs to send a messenger. How do you
Right.
feel, or what's your? Oh, wait, there's a third form of battle, which is we had a battle and this side won. Now we're telling the story
And the
of
Hobbit fell
the
asleep.
negotiations.
So
Yes, exactly. Um, how do you feel about those three? Some people love the sword to sword, individual, in your face combat. Other people are more like, just give me the big picture and the strategy and get it over with. And other people are like, I don't need to know that. All I need to know is they had a battle.
right. I think the most impressive and interesting battles that stick in my head are always the ones that are down on the ground with just the one character.
Okay.
Um, that being said, I don't know. I think it totally depends on the writer.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I agree. I think it depends on the writer and the character. You can't
Mhm.
have, you can't be in the POV of a general commanding a massive army and then have him in the front lines and still be in his POV. It's just generals aren't supposed to do that unless you're a Viking.
Right.
you know?
You need to have something a little bit more of an overview. Um,
hmm
and
Yeah,
I
it's
I
like how
do
do you
like the
command when you're so close to the battle?
right. That's what I mean. Like Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson do a really good job of both, right? Where they can kind of weave in between, and
Matt.
you have Matt, yep, exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that. One minute he's on a tower, the next minute he's like, I gotta go actually fight to get the feel of this battle.
I was like, okay, and then I'm back. I know what we're doing.
Uh huh. I
So
love Matt.
uh, Matt is great. Matt probably not underrated, maybe a little overrated, but I do love him.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I didn't even, no, never mind. That's getting into a whole different podcast.
come
This is
listen,
not the Wheel of Time podcast.
come listen to the Dita Paksenarrion where we spoil the crap out of the final battle.
yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, I think for this book in particular, we get that same kind of interweave, but it's for, well, we never see an overview. But what we do get is we get Pax getting injured a lot because she is human and she does get
hmm
cuts when she's battling. She's not immortal.
Right.
But when we get those pullbacks, then we kind of hear what else is happening.
And her plot armor just keeps her alive, nothing else.
Exactly. Well, it might not be plot armor. Might be a medallion around her neck. Doesn't explain all the previous battles before she attained that, but oh, that actually reminds me. We didn't even talk about the prologue of this book. It's when her sword and her paper work
Oh,
is
yes.
delivered.
Yes, because what we're reading is the Deed of Paksenarrion, which
Yeah,
is the book delivered to her family.
her
Yes,
family.
I completely
But
forgot
the
about that.
Yeah. But the end of the book is not finished. So what no one knows if it was delivered to them because she's quit her service, something else has happened, or if she's dead.
Yeah, we don't know if Paksenarrion survives this.
Yeah, we have no clue. We do know she's without her sword, and she,
Yes,
if
she
I'm
doesn't have her
remembering
iron
correctly,
sword anymore, and she doesn't have her paladin sword anymore. So we know
yeah,
she achieves the rank of paladin because it's there in the prologue.
it's there in the prologue,
But
but it's not. But she hasn't even attained it, I don't think, by the end of this book. So
no, no. In fact, at the end of this book, she takes off the Girdish medallion and basically says if she's going to have any more weird cramps, she wants to know that there aren't any weird deities involved.
interfering, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an
What do you think
interesting.
of the
Yeah.
analogy of Gerd and as a Catholic saint?
I don't know if
When the
I'm.
Gerdsman's explaining him to Pax, he sounds a lot like the way like medieval Catholicism thought of the saints.
Okay.
God's up there, like she used to worship, her family used to worship the god, and they put out offerings, but without any expectation of actual, I do this for you, I ask for help and you'll give it.
Okay.
But then Gerd comes around and it's like, well, yeah, you ask him for help, and if you're one of his people, he helps you. And that seems to me, I was never Catholic, but that seems to me the way medieval Catholicism portrays how the saints are supposed to interact.
Okay.
Since Vatican II, I've got no clue.
Yeah.
But I've been following Pontifex, but they don't really get into how saints interact. They stick more to what the popes did and what the doctrines were.
Sure.
So
Okay. Yeah, I'm just not very well versed in Catholicism either. So that's all interesting to me. I obviously at some point religion has to play a part in this a little bit, right? I mean, she's definitely um,
well, yeah.
pulling from
I
something.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, we assume Elizabeth Moon was American or English or Australian or something. I haven't looked it up. Therefore, she was at least exposed to the concepts of Judeo-Christian concepts of deity, shall we say.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, if
Absolutely.
she was born and raised in India, she'd probably be talking about pantheons rather than, one god with helpers.
Right. Not to say that there isn't other gods, though. I mean, there is some level of there's multiple deities. There's a lot of
Yes, there
different
are.
worship happening. Um,
Yes.
so she does diversify it, but it does seem to be very. These aren't all gods from the same, like you were saying, from the same pantheon. They're all just different areas of worship based on physical location.
Right, very
Um,
classic fantasy type gods. You've got your good gods, your
yeah,
bad gods, your gods of health, your gods of water, your gods of, whatever. But there
yeah,
seems to be like this one ancient god that really doesn't do much. He's just kind of there.
right,
And, we don't really get much more of an explanation than her family would leave out offerings for it. But more as a way of expressing gratitude for a good harvest and, nobody dying of plague than anything else.
yeah, yeah. That's an interesting point too. Is that she's not really a religious person. Like
No, not at all.
her her religious aspects are passive at best.
Hmm.
Um,
And she
so
spends most of her time arguing about why Gerd can't be a god.
right,
And she can't figure out, wait, if he can heal, then he's not a god. How does that work? You know,
right.
she's
There's
she's
a
really
lot of
stuck on this in
complexities.
between thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of complexities to what counts as just magic versus is actual deific power versus
Hmm.
who's an imposter, who's not.
And
Um,
why, if a god is good or Gerd is good, he wouldn't just help anybody who asked. Why would you have to be, like she cannot. I feel she's resentful against Gerd for not protecting her friends who were followers of Gerd. It's like, why
right,
does it have to be channeled through a paladin? And
right.
I don't know. Are you familiar with the concept of theodicy?
No.
It's an ancient question in Christianity of why do bad things happen to good people, basically. Or if
Oh,
God is
okay. Yeah,
all
I've heard
good and
that.
all
Yeah.
powerful, then why does he allow bad things to happen in the world? And Pax is basically bringing this up again with, well, my two friends who were Gerdish both died. If God is good and God looks after them, if Gerd is good and Gerd looks after him, why didn't Gerd protect them?
Right.
And, I have a strong hunch we'll see this answered in the next two books. But it's a very interesting and very classic question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in the case of this book, the answer kind of comes from, well, these are not omnipotent individuals, pretty clearly.
True. Yes.
Um, because I'd also, you know, she's upset that Kana never gets healed, but I don't. I think she's kind of ignoring. Well, because she's in denial, right? She doesn't believe in Gerd, so why would she believe that Kana's healing is actually happening proactively
Right.
after she's touched her with the medallion versus
Yeah, she keeps saying, "Oh, it was just the ointment."
instantaneous? Yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot that it's not as bad after the first day. It's like you got an arrow in your shoulder. I think it's
And it
gonna be
was
pretty
turning
bad for a while.
red.
Yeah,
You had gunny sack used as a bandage. It's like that is not a good bandage.
no. And you've been moving the entire day,
Hmm.
covered in
It's
mud,
like
just a
it's not
mess.
going to just suddenly get better, on the third day.
Right.
Well, this has been very interesting, and I am looking forward to covering the next couple of books with you.
Same here. I'm invested. I definitely want to see what happens
Cool.
next. I'm especially curious, like what what does Pax do she's decided to stay with the company, but I just doubt that's what she actually continues to do, because it seems like whether she wants to or not, she is going to become more. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to rereading these and remembering what the story was.
That's always great, right? The best thing about reading as many books as most of us do is eventually you have to get to the rereads, and you don't always have to remember what you read before. So it's always a new adventure.
Yeah, yeah, and even if it is new, you're not the same person you were when you read it 5 years ago, and so the things that stick out are very different.
Yeah. That's what I think. I would have had a very different perspective on this book 10 years ago than I would now.
Jingles, this has been a great first podcast. I am very glad to get to know you, and I look forward to discussing the rest of the trilogy with you. That concludes our episode. You can find us on Legendarium's Discord. The invite link is on thelegendarium.com. We are also on Twitter at Green Team Pod and Reddit. Join us in supporting the Legendarium via Patreon. Shout out to Horizon Brave for starting it all. Thank you to Jingles for joining me. I'm Seeker. Until next time, bye. Music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks.